There she is.
Here I am.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having
Um, how are you?
me. I'm very well, IT. How are you?
I'm great, IT. So, as you may know, our Freestyle Friday format of kind of interview, we at one point we started out with 16 bars, 16 questions, for which all of the answers are of course going to be bars because of all of our guests are baraticians, right? Um, So what we're gonna do now that we have this kind of new format with YouTube Live, where we're doing the kind of the higher tech version than what we had on IG Live, so people can kind of appreciate this a little bit more. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna be barring out. So we have a certain number of questions. We're not gonna name it bar 1 through bar 16. We're just gonna do it. So
Let me turn some lights on because I
okay,
feel like it's a little shadowy.
sure,
Get this.
that's fine.
Not sure if this is going to be to our benefit or if I'm going to have to actually. Yeah.
It's nice mood lighting. It's all good.
Let's see if I can. Oh, I was like, what is behind me? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we'll rock it like this for now.
Okay. All right.
If
Cool.
it becomes that you can't see me, let me know.
All right. We'll rely on the chat to chime in on that.
Okay.
So I want to get I want to give you an opportunity to kind of let the people know a little bit about yourself. I know you to be a masterful singer, songwriter, and a director, and a baker, and uh, um, a humanitarian. But tell people a little bit more about yourself in terms of how you would kind of give your nominal determination, right?
Well, one of the instructors of your SOSA class,
Mm-hmm.
for sure, for that first year.
Mm-hmm.
Nominal determination as an exercise. I think it changes so much. Do you find that to be the case, to be IT?
Um,
Or do you feel pretty solid in yours?
you know, I say that I went with something that I knew was going to be um, a little bit malleable as far as how I consider myself to be this soon to be known individual who won't at one point will become an all-star, right? Um, I see things kind of in a progression. So there's going to be a more nascent period of my development as an artist, and then of course I kind of move on into as I gain wisdom and more experience, then I can kind of maybe mold and craft and become more of a master with what I do. So I think that I'm still at the stage where I'm trying to master some certain things, and of course we all are trying to master something. None of us are perfect. All of us have things that we could still master. So yeah, I think that just kind of aspirational nominal determination is how I kind of decided to go about naming myself soon to be known all star. But of course, that's a mouthful. That's a lungful. So I decided I'm gonna go with just Stubby Cos because it's a lot easier and it's kind of goofy sounding. And so once you hear it, I think a lot of people that read it, they're like Stubby Cos. There's no, it's Stubby Cos. There's a lot of ways that I could go about spelling it, but I think I landed on something that gives me a little bit of maybe potentiality or potential notoriety once I start to pick up a little bit more steam. But everybody knows me here on this Freestyle Friday, and so we're gonna pass it over to you and ask you the same question. Then we'll
All
go
right.
into all of the rest of the questions that are bars.
Yeah, all right. All right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I would say that I am a spiritual being in a physical body that's doing my best to use my unique gifts to be a beneficial presence on this planet.
Okay, that's that's a mouthful, and that's definitely something
But
that
it's to be known all star.
yeah. But you know what? Like I think the determination that you have to be that thing, to be that expansive and inclusive and altruistic thing that is there's a lot of detail and nuance and things that go into that we can all appreciate because of the outcome. So right, so somebody can name themselves one thing, but what they do with their lives, the work that they do, that could be an entirely separate thing, but equal as well to the way that you name yourself. So, and then of course, there's like reverse associations and stuff where you can kind of go backwards through the metaphor chain. But we'll stick with that for now, and that was very beautiful. Thank you. So, moving on to these kind of questions that we pre-prepared.
Yes.
So first off, can you tell us a bit about your Get Free initiative and why it was important for you to bring women together?
Ah, I love my sisters. I love being a Black woman. I love being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many times that we are positioned against each other, that we don't take the time to appreciate each other, or that we place our value in how others see us and not how we see ourselves and each other. There's a lot of reasons, historically and structurally, why our closest allies become not our allies at all. I find particularly in the Black community, in a lot of communities on the left as opposed to on the right,
Mm-hmm.
politically, splintering occurs. We have ultimate shared common goals, but there'll be a disagreement in how to get there. There'll be hurt feelings, there'll be historical wrongs, and we don't come together. Instead, we splinter apart.
Mm.
I was in DC and I was working with some really beautiful, wonderful Black women, and I was inspired by them, and I wanted to use my platform to amplify their voice.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we do that, every time we come together for a greater good, we make space for healing.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't called Get Free when I started.
Mm-hmm.
That was the healing that came out of it, and the understanding that came out of it is that we are all uh, healers of ourselves and each other, and that it's our job to get free, and it's our choice. It's a possibility for each of us to do so.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So considering, we are at a point now where getting together is maybe a little bit more difficult for people, being able to have those intimate conversations, those needed conversations. Obviously, we have all these social media outlets that allow us to talk on a certain level, but of course, there's the more intimate level of being able to look one to one in somebody's eyes and kind of be a little bit more vulnerable. As we sit in this era of like political unrest and COVID and stay-at-home orders and all this tension, a lot of emotions can kind of bubble up, and we've seen a situation, of course, in your your home state of Minnesota, where we have someone kind of instigating a long, time-honored, I hate to say it that way, but tradition of, police brutality. And then we have kind of the reaction, right? And the reaction obviously is a culmination of a lot of things. But when we talk about peaceful political civil protest, right? How much of that is freestyling versus sticking to a planned and rigid itinerary, because we want to look at our reactions to things as very intentional. We want to look at things as structured. We don't want to just kind of run around like chickens with our heads cut off whenever something happens that really hits home or pulls at heartstrings or what have you. So when it comes time to organize and protest, how much of it is freestyling? How much of it is kind of like sticking to a specific itinerary so that we can kind of have a unified voice all at once in unison?
So you're speaking of the uprising.
Yeah.
Speaking of our uprising.
The uprising of 2020, which will go down in history books.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed. I'm honored to say I was there when the 3rd precinct went up, and there's no place I would have rather been.
Mm.
It's an interesting question, because how much is freestyling? Or how much do we think is freestyling?
Right.
If we look through a longer lens, if we take a further step back, we know that things pushed to an extreme will eventually, there will be an escalation. So that's actually very predictable. That is actually sticking to the script. If
Yeah.
there's a certain amount of oppression for a certain amount of time and the conditions favor it, there will be violence. There will be a response. I want to differentiate between a reaction
Hmm.
and a response.
Yeah.
A reaction to me is not let me step back and think about it and plan and be strategic. It's just I'm reacting.
Yeah.
It's almost like a reflex. But a response is how do I want to respond to this? So I think people here may have been reacting initially,
Hmm.
but if you take a step back, it was definitely a likely response over time. It could be predicted over time that eventually this would happen. It
Hmm.
just happened to happen here and now. With that said, a number of really talented and committed young activists who were more organized than you would expect people to be ready at the drop of a dime
Yeah.
to start to organize in earnest. So they were quite responsive, and they were able to be responsive because of Philando Castile, because of Jamar Clark, because of the other unrest in this area historically, and the long history of activism in the Twin Cities that a lot of people don't know about, but it
Hmm.
is there.
Right.
And they definitely showed and proved that it was there. Now, their responsiveness is sometimes overshadowed by the reactivity of the people joining the movement who've never been involved to this degree in politics or social unrest before. So you see the complexity of your problem. It really depends on where you're standing
Yeah.
in terms of what is responsive and what is reactive.
Okay. Um, so to kind of stay with that theme a little bit, have you noticed, and as a response to the response,
Mm.
have you noticed any significant linguistic devices? Because obviously at SOSA we like to pick apart words and really understand the intention behind what's being used, right? So, are there any significant linguistic devices or themes being used by the media or by governing bodies to steer public perception since the lockdown began and as a result of that response during the lockdown?
Well, I'm sure you've heard the safer at home orders
Mm.
as opposed to the stay at home orders.
I actually
Uh,
did not hear that one.
yeah, safer at home.
Mm.
Uh, that's one of the early ones that stood out to me.
Hmm.
Uh, in terms of the protests in particular,
Hmm.
we saw a lot of early characterization, violence, the violent protesters, another night of civil unrest, this and that. And as it changed,
Hmm.
there was a lot of work to change that narrative. And that work came at the cost of people's bodies
Yeah,
and being
very
able to
unfortunate.
videotape it. Uh,
Countless.
yeah, just relentless footage of state-sponsored violence
Right.
is what allowed the language in the media, not on all outlets, but on many outlets, to shift and say these are peaceful protesters.
Right.
Uh, we were also fortunate here in Mayor Carter, who's the mayor of St. Paul, and in a lot of cases, Governor Walz, who were like, yeah, the protesters are peaceful for the most part, or a lot of the people, a lot of the unrest that we have is caused by people from out of town.
Hmm.
So that being brought to the surface also helped a lot. In terms of spoken language, is one thing. One of the things I've really noticed is the written language in the art,
Hmm.
in the graffiti. that's left in these places of protest where you'll see ACAB or
Right.
1312, and you'll see Fuck 12. One of the interesting things I've seen is there's always the semantic fight of Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Blue
Mhm.
Lives Matter. There's always that semantic argument, which is very telling in the connotations of that.
Right.
But also these trust channels where I can say 1312 to my mom, she's not going to know what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so there's many of those things going on where if you know, you know, and if you don't know, you won't know. And we know that's common for community building in all areas, including music.
Right. Right. And which that plays into the next question that I actually had regarding music. We've seen elements of music. We've seen social media remixes, and we've even seen chants all play a role in
Yes,
speaking truth to power during these
yes.
protests, and kind of as it spreads to kind of virality on social media.
Mhm.
So how can music move protests? Like what is your
You
what is
should
your
be
kind of?
able to tell me that.
Oh, I can, but I just wanted to get your kind of perspective on um, you being on the ground, kind of,
Mm,
I don't want to say ground zero, but essentially at the kind of the spearhead of a lot of the action and the motion that has happened on behalf of the people, by the people. Um, when we see music become kind of naturally integrated into the process of protest,
yes.
um, what do you see as the significant thread of why that's even brought in the first place? Because you would think on surface level that musicality and uh, you know protest against power
Mhm.
aren't necessarily one to one, but you see it being used a lot. Maybe because of the repetition, but more so from a cultural standpoint, it's almost a way that we can see um, the spiritual aspect of why we care about what we're doing, kind of manifest. So
So
what do you see?
it, it's protest and music have always had a relationship, and music has
Sure.
always had uh, one of its uses has always been as a form of protest. We like to think of it as belonging to Black people. It's not necessarily correct. It's not correct, actually, even though Black people have used it very, very well. Woody Guthrie had a guitar, I believe, that had a sticker on it or something on it that said, "This machine fights fascists." So and that's punk music, that's all that. But if you go back to when America was home to millions of enslaved people,
Mhm.
how are people? Songs would be written and created that actually gave instruction of how to escape or when someone was coming for
Mhm.
the Underground Railroad. This coded language has always been important.
Right.
The role of music serves many, many purposes, whether it's just to unite the crowd and focus the energy, or if we're thinking of like just how music can unify the rhythm of a chain gang, it can unify the rhythm of a march.
Mhm.
It can have people marching in time, even though I didn't see a lot of marching in time. I saw a lot of people's spirits being raised and
Lifted.
galvanized and just being on the same frequency and on the same page because you're singing the same words. And then the beautiful thing that comes out of it is when you start getting videos that come out of interactions, and then those videos get remixed. And next thing you know, there's this hilarious video. You
Hilarious.
about to lose your job.
Right.
And then next day you go out to the protest, and that's what everybody is chanting. So
Right.
it becomes like that feedback loop
I
becomes
love it.
really a joyous part of the protest process that I think that's new. I
Yeah.
think
Did you think so?
oh yeah, I think that's something new that's fueled by technology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How else would we have done that before?
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, the pervasiveness of social media, the ability for our, because we talk we I think before social media we used to talk about how you could be connected with the entire world through the internet, and it was just this kind of vague thing. But now we actually see how we can tangibly track how something is trending in a different country. We can tangibly look at the responses that people have, because you then now have people who are using their cell phones live on site, whether it's in Minnesota, whether it's in France, whether it's somewhere in Africa,
Very,
all
it's
across the
very
world,
real
right?
time.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's very real time. I like it.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
exciting.
Yeah, and it's good for the concept of revolution, that there is a power that people can utilize that is very tangible, because it's so ubiquitous with people being able to access social media from almost anywhere in the world. So
Yes.
it's amazing. So then the next question, I'm gonna kind of skip around a little bit here.
Skipping.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I'm gonna come back to some stuff, but I just want to kind of get a nice thread here.
Okay.
Um, so it seems that right now there are age-old conversations that some people are just now becoming aware of.
Isn't
What?
that always the case?
Perhaps. I think it's we can see it happening in real time more so, again, because of social media. A lot of social media is kind of fueling everything that this conversation is about, obviously too. So we have to tip our hat to that. But at the same time, um, there's willingness, almost maybe begrudging willingness, but it's still willingness nonetheless for people to actually have debates and things like that, where a lot of people are coming being exposed to ideas for the first time, being exposed to the plights of people that maybe they never saw in their everyday lives for the first time. So what are some ways that one can use new information that may not be pleasant or reassuring to one's benefit? How can we get people to see a benefit in um, exposing themselves to hard truths or just tough conversations?
One of the things I found to be helpful and effective
Hmm.
is to expose cognitive dissonance
Hmm.
and force the aha moment.
Yeah.
So if if you can say, "Oh, you like restorative justice in this context, but you don't like it in that context. So how can you say abolish
Right.
prison?"
Right.
And it's like, "Oh, huh, I've got there's something that needs to be wrestled with here." Um, the other thing is if you can present some information, oh, this is something I've done. I was like, okay, it's like the end of To Kill a Mockingbird. Uh,
Can
um,
you illuminate for the people who haven't finished the book?
I actually think I'm confusing this book with another. Anyway, you have a piece of information, you think it comes from one place,
Hmm.
and you're like, okay, but what if this same thing was said by this person? Oh, this I hate this person, but you liked
Right.
this message a second before.
Right.
Well, I don't like it anymore because this person said it. It's like,
Don't shoot the
well,
messenger.
we didn't ask you about the person, we asked about the message. So it makes you question, what are you actually angry about, or
Right.
where are your feelings really connected to? I think people are interested in new information and are somewhat willing to have new conversations. Uh, I don't know that it's always rooted in the best place. I think a lot of it is rooted in, I feel bad about myself. I don't want to anymore. Like,
Hmm.
what's the quickest way I can not feel bad?
Yeah.
Which is not a real desire to grow. It's a
Right.
self-preservation
The knee
instinct.
jerk. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if it's always coming from the best place. But by the same token, let's take it where we can get it and see how far we can get with it.
Yeah.
Maybe you start here and are like, you know what, learning stuff isn't actually that bad. I just
Right.
start one
Right.
place and grow from there. So
Cool.
that's my
Cool.
hope.
Since IT in the chat says cognitive dissonance can run deep, it's very
I mean,
deeply rooted in
yeah.
American tradition, in perhaps the controlling colonizing force of the world has to kind of
Yep.
operate through that because
Yes.
of, what kind of comes with it. If you're going to dominate people, you have to figure out a way to not see them as equal to you. So you have to do
I,
all these
I
different,
highly recommend. I highly recommend this book called The Art of Savage Discovery,
okay.
and it's about victim. Well, I read it in a victimology course, and it says to make somebody your enemy, you have to first find how they're different from you, and then you make that really important.
Yeah, you expand upon that over and over
Yeah,
and
you're
over again.
like,
Yeah.
so it's only because we're so diverse that we can have so many enemies. But you think like, oh, well, if we were all exactly the same color and we all had exactly the same hair and we were all the exact same height, but we had different eye color,
Mm-hmm.
then that would be the thing.
Yeah.
Humans, I am prayerful that humans as a species are going to evolve past the point where their fear drives them to hurt people uh, instinctively.
Right. Fear being a base urge and something that we have to, in order to be high-minded, in order to kind of have a higher kind of vibrational frequency, if you get into spirituality, you have to get beyond fear. Fear is the very bottom of that entire totem pole, and if you want to work your way up
Well,
to the top.
you say fear is the bottom, but I think within all the negative emotions there is fear. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
follow every
Right.
negative emotion back, there's fear there.
Yep.
So there's only in every moment an option to choose fear or its opposite, which is love.
Right.
So we're just as a species meant to be evolving to better decision making.
Right. Greg Newman IT says there's a requirement to defibrillate the conversation to create perspective. So shocking
Yeah.
people kind of
Ah, ah. Sounds
into
violent.
life, waking people up. But I mean, it's like people are on life support and they don't even know it. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's important to sometimes you got to splash cold water on things. But yeah. So moving on to the next question. Let's see. Okay, so going back to kind of the so-called civil unrest, but we'll call it the uprising. Reduction of police force is one of the larger demands during this election cycle of 2020. Will life be easier for victims of police brutality to freestyle through with less extreme policing, or is there a next gatekeeper to get past after that?
Ah. Well, in Minneapolis, we're not trying to reduce the police.
Okay.
In Minneapolis, we have a commitment from the city council to disband the police.
Oh, there it is. Heavy.
Um, I'm really excited about it. However,
It's a good experiment. I mean, at the very
it's
at the
been
very
done.
least, like at the
Been
very
done.
very least.
It's been done in Camden, New Jersey. If they could do it in a place so much more
Right.
notorious for violence than
Right.
here, I think that we have a good shot. It's thinking that these things are extreme is part of what makes people scared to do them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the how it is done will determine
Mm-hmm.
whether it becomes easier, because just the absence of police,
By
you won't get
itself,
beat
right?
up by police,
Right.
but what else is going on?
Right.
Like those resources that have been directed towards the police to militarize the police, to build them up, to make them such heavy presences.
Right.
So they're responding to mental health calls. They're responding to animal control calls. They're responding to domestic violence and sexual assault calls. They're responding to things they're not trained for. If the people who are in need of help are able to get help from professionals trained
Mm-hmm.
in the areas that they actually need, if we are able to put money back into the school systems
Right.
that was taken out to fund police, all of those things will make life easier to freestyle through.
Right.
But just the absence of police
Mm-hmm.
creates just yet another void.
Right.
To have police reduction, you also want to have crime reduction,
Right.
but you have to look at the factors driving that
What are the
crime.
factors exactly? That's the important thing, and I think I think the people who may not understand the argument to either defund or disband police force in all these different municipal kind of places, they don't necessarily understand, like you said, the factors and how deep those factors actually run. There's a lot of historical context that gets dismissed as, oh, well, that's old, that's over, that happened a long time ago. I don't remember that. I wasn't here for it. I didn't do it.
I
So
didn't do it.
yeah. So I
It was
think
done though.
right, exactly. Somebody did, and
Done.
you know, you got to look at who it is and why, and then look at the pattern of, you know, that kind of force, whether it's police force or, you know, patriotic force or, you know, expansive force or colonial force, whatever the force was that was imposed upon somebody else. That was the
It-
thing that continued to happen that created these conditions. And I think a lot of people just dismiss that. That doesn't count. We're talking
We're
about right now. We're equal on the same standing somehow.
we're not going to in one fell swoop dismantle the oppressive structures that have held this country together.
Right.
But the first step is in recognizing that they're there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still in a country where people are like, you want to take down statues of slave owners?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about that.
Right.
Like, that's how far removed people are from being able to recognize
Mm-hmm.
oppression in their midst. And there's just a long way to go and a lot of work.
Right.
And it's going to be messy because all births are messy. So the birth of the new way is going to be messy as well.
Yeah. And you know, it's you know, we talked to Sky IT in a couple of these Freestyle Fridays ago, and we talked about, you know, vibrations and kind of ascension and thinking on
Not
higher
surprised.
levels, right? Of course. But it's like, you know, I think trying to get beyond the thing that you're mired in, because that's the thing that's holding us back. And if when people tell you that that's the thing that's holding us back and you're in denial, then it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that it's going to continue. You know,
But
yeah.
I do think that there's a risk of not looking at things critically.
Mm-hmm.
Because what holds us back most of the time is our own mental processes. You know, we're not going to not make progress because there's statues of slave owners.
Right.
Those are just indicators that we have more way
Exactly.
to go.
Yeah.
Um,
That's indexical.
there you go. I appreciate it.
So from your experience, what are some inspirations that have been born from the constraints being presented during the COVID-19 lockdown that we are still in and seem like we're going to be in for quite some time now?
My meditation game is really on point right now. I'm feeling very good about my practice in that way.
Yeah.
Um, I've been reading more than ever, a bunch of books at the foot of my bed that I'm in the midst of reading. Um, what a gorgeous opportunity. What a beautiful time to be alive.
Yeah,
That we
seriously.
have this dynamic pause, that we're able to stop and say, hey, am I going where I want to go? Is it time for me to pivot? Am I in alignment with, you know, who I am and my values and my, uh, you know, unfoldment? Am I in alignment with that? Is
Right.
there, if there's something that needs to change, now is the time.
Yeah.
Now is the time. And really developing such a deep appreciation for the people in my life and for myself and taking care of myself and learning how to take care of others even from afar.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I mean, it's actually so beautiful
Right.
because
It's amazing how powerful we are in the midst of all of this.
and I, you know, we've all seen pictures of the 60s
Right.
when they had their uprising and their civil unrest. And I'm so excited to be a part of our generation's version of that. I never would have thought that I would have the opportunity to be a part of this change. And so every day is a gift.
Yeah. Amazing. And
There's no normal anymore.
no, and
There
I
is no
actually love that because I think one of the things that we, as I guess a younger generation all across the board, have been fighting for is the destruction of the idea of normal, because what normalcy was at one point is still held onto by those in power who tend to be kind of past their, if we call it prime or what have you. So it's like if you hold on to
welcome
that,
back because it's over.
yeah, it's over. It's
It's
done.
over.
It's done. You know what I'm saying?
There is
Like,
no normal. Normal
nah,
don't exist.
nah. And so I think, yeah, that's funny. And how does humor play into a life guided or not guided by freestyle concepts? How does humor
Mm.
play into that?
Well, I think that you have to, life can be very heavy. It's all about how you carry it.
Yeah,
It's important. It's about your intentionality. You
hmm,
know, for me, brevity is very important. I can't take myself too seriously. I can't take anything I'm dealing with too seriously. It just makes it very difficult to move through
yeah,
uh, space and time. So, humor is the thing that can it can ease friction.
hmm,
It can lubricate situations. It's like, okay, this is tight, it's a little uncomfortable, and then you have the humor that allows you to move through it with a little more grace and ease.
right. It reminds you of your humanity, your shared humanity that you have with the people who you share that humor with. Once you realize, hey, we're all, we can all laugh at this awkward situation. We can all laugh at this because it's so ridiculously messed up that the fact that we can see it as messed up is laughable to the fact that it exists. So let's get together on that and laugh about that, and then use that as a springboard to move away from it, because that's why we're laughing. We don't want to laugh at ourselves.
We do want to laugh at ourselves.
Well, not we want we I think maybe laughing with each other, or the royal we, being able to laugh at yourself is important, but the way, it's not in that kind of aha, not that laugh,
We don't want to laugh at people, we want to laugh with people. But
exactly.
sometimes, especially when we're talking to ourselves, sometimes it's important to laugh at yourself. When you're
Hmm,
talking to yourself,
hmm,
like we frequently take ourselves way too seriously.
yeah,
Sometimes I just have to laugh at myself frequently.
yeah. um so then the next question on this list, uh we appreciate your effort towards using your multiple skills to assemble and hand make masks for your audience, uh,
Yeah.
and for just whomever you can serve with these. What is your take on the
That was.
significance? I'm sorry.
I said, what an adventure that was.
Yeah, right. What is your take on the significance of the metaphors? Breath is life, and breath
Mm.
is death.
Mm. What is my take on the significance of them?
Yeah, like as a creator of an object that could potentially save somebody's life, um, as a creator, as somebody who found it in their heart to think of a way to save people's lives using the concept of breath, to prevent the breath from others, or to prevent breath from getting out and infecting others, depending on how you look at it. Yeah, like did that play a role, or was that something that you can kind of reflect on, and see that kind of metaphor is relevant to the way that you kind of pursued that?
Well, I think for me, the idea of breath is life probably took root many years earlier, probably around 2013 when my mother was diagnosed with advanced lung disease.
Mm,
And then when you're watching someone who really can't breathe and you see the immediate effects of that, you're like, oh, all right. Like, we don't think about the many processes that are required for us to live. Breath is a very easy one to see, and your heartbeat is kind of like, but there's a number, there's numerous. Our bodies are all miracles that they function, that we're able to wake up, and that all the chemicals are in the right quantities at the right times, the right places, and our synapses are going and the electrical charges are firing in our heart in the right order and everything is ordered properly. But breath is life is an easy one to see. COVID makes it so breath is death.
Yeah.
And other infectious diseases. That's why when you're out and you're, man, I had a panic attack at the grocery store, not a full blown, I'm being hyperbolic. I was at the grocery store and I was like, oh man, I feel like I might need to cough. I'm not coughing in this grocery store. Everyone look at me, my mask on, like I just held it in. My eyes were like watering.
Oh,
I was
man,
like,
I hate that.
oh no, I think I just had like a tickle in my throat. Like I haven't been, but the feeling that everyone would look at me like I was going to kill them, I was stressed out about it.
Did you hear the horror music in the background?
Yes, definitely. I was like, but it's interesting because some people have really, like my mother, has really internalized breath is death. So she will actively avoid as many people, like her quarantine is super hardcore. And then there's other people who are like, not my breath. Or if I get it, I don't care. If I get it, I don't care. And if that means that somebody you care about gets it, I mean, by extension, I also don't care. And that's a pretty intense thing for me to confront on a regular basis because it's my mom. You know, like whenever I think of who's vulnerable, I'm like, oh no, you guys are trying to kill my mom's bad.
Yeah. Empathy is definitely needed along with that breaking down of cognitive dissonance. Because I think, because, you know, people, to your point, people don't necessarily, they don't think about the effects that their actions, see, it's almost as though they see their actions as inconsequential to them, and therefore they should be inconsequential to everybody else. If I don't care about it, you shouldn't care about it. But, you know, in this day and age, that can have deadly consequences. And raising your level of concern and like the energy that it takes to have that concern to like a murmur level of, I'm gonna not do this so that it doesn't have negative effects for other people, being the baseline and going up from there. That's asking a lot for people, and like you said, it's you know, it's not gonna happen overnight, but it's important for people to have empathy, because if you understand that it could happen to you, then you doing it to somebody else should make sense.
I think that's too weak.
Yeah?
I think that's weak. And I think it still relies on people's selfishness.
Okay.
Empathy requires people's selfishness, because it's saying, imagine if it happened to you.
Right. Well, it's like, trying to meet people where they're at.
Oh, I am selfish. I don't want that to happen to me.
Right.
We're all naturally selfish. It's okay. But like, empathy brings you to that other person's level, wherever that level is. I prefer the cultivation of compassion, which is like, can we all want goodness and happiness and health for every living being? Can we want that?
Right.
And that's a huge ask, but I think it's easier for people to say, goodness, more goodness. Sounds like an okay idea. Like, it's so general that you can actually, it's easier to have an inroad with that general idea than it is, hey, can you want goodness for your enemy? No. It's like, well, can you just want goodness? Can you want peace on earth?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So sometimes the generality actually provides a better gateway than the specificity that empathy requires. Because for empathy, you're like, I'm not this person, so I can't even empathize with where they're coming from. But you're like, well, but we can have compassion.
Yeah, I mean, there are experiments where people try to, you know, there's fireworks out there, and we're gonna get into that in a minute too about Independence Day. But give me a second. Yeah, there are people out there who look at trying to be a better person as a thing that has no relation to trying to be a better person around people. And I think, you know, there's a little bit of nuance there, but of course, we also want to at least be able to have a discussion, right? Like if people can look at compassion as their basis for voting, because once you start to vote policies that people can say this is a compassionate policy. It may not be an empathetic policy because that's not really the way policy works, but it can be compassionate in that you're trying to achieve, you're trying to be the rising tide with this policy to help, you know, everybody kind of get to a better place. And so I think voting is where compassion might have the strongest effect, perhaps, just because it doesn't have that nuance. But then when it starts to be a conversation about what you are saying to another person and how you interact with people on a one-to-one basis, I think there's a necessity for empathy, because even though it's harder, even though it's more specific, it's still necessary for you to have general, basic, everyday human interactions without essentially ruining a whole person's day or life. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's just my opinion, of course, but I have very strong opinions. You know this. So we're gonna move on. So you're a founding member of the Society of Spoken Art. For those that aren't familiar with SOSA, can you tell us a little bit about what it is as SOSA from your perspective and your role in its development?
SOSA, Society of Spoken Art, an educational rap guild that functions to develop the rapper's mind, where we have 3 to 4 main buckets. Those buckets would be contemporary theory, like metaphor theory. It's our work with Lakoff and the like. It also includes semiotics. We have classics. That's where we study like Aristotle's Poetics, study Shakespeare. We have computation. And we're fortunate to have Doc IT, Nick Mumford, who is a wonderful professor and great mind in creative computation.
And a great freestyler.
And we also have, a champion.
Right.
And we also have cognition, which is about the structures in the mind and how they process language and how they inform how we speak, but also how we speak lets us know what's going on in our mind. So SOSA aims to take rappers who are good and make them great.
Mm-hmm.
And just the furtherance of rap as a high art. I was fortunate enough to be the executive director and the admin of Society of Spoken Art for 2 years in its nascency. So I got to help co-teach with our founder, Lupe IT, the first 2 classes to go through the apprentice program.
We all appreciate you for that. I can speak for both classes personally.
Thank you guys.
So here's a nice, tightly wound question. Communicatively speaking, I'm gonna start with that. Communicatively speaking,
how can we always speaking communicatively?
Well, we'll see what the predicate is here. How can men improve when it comes to understanding the nature of what it's like to be a Black woman in a time where so many voices go dismissed or unheard?
I think the first thing is to see Black women as human beings. Say, of course, but I can't really name the number of men who, when they become fathers of daughters, everything changes. Oh my God. The world, I got to make this world better for my daughter. I have previously become offended, but of late, I've just become grateful because late change is better than no change, for sure. I have previously found it offensive
Mm-hmm.
that it wasn't worth changing the world until someone who had your eyes or
Mm-hmm.
your DNA was on the planet with two X chromosomes. Now you're like, oh, now the world's not good enough. It was good enough before. It was good enough for me before. How you treated me before was okay to you. Now that you have a daughter, you're like, oh, well, I've grown. I'm like, if you could look at every Black woman as someone's daughter, if you could look at every Black woman as a human being that would want to be treated like any other human being, that would want to be heard, that would want to be believed and respected and valued. Uh, and I know it's hard. It's ridiculous that it's hard. We've been so conditioned to not believe each other when we say we're in pain.
Mm-hmm.
We've been so conditioned not to feel pain and show pain and vulnerability. When we deal with each other, we have to take a step back and say, man, I know your journey is difficult. First,
Right.
whatever journey we're on is difficult. So instead of judging each other harshly, you know, see each other in a kind light and really look for the humanity first.
Okay. Um, big facts all around. Um, so when it comes to being able to use one's imagination, it seems important to have a good imagination when breaking down metaphorical concepts in real time.
Mm.
A lot of things are metaphors. We come to learn as we continue to study metaphor. Everything almost is a metaphor. Even physical objects could be metaphors.
Yes.
Images can be metaphors. Songs, ideas, conversations, civilizations, the
The
concept of
name,
time.
the name of this show.
Life is a freestyle. It is a huge metaphor that we would love for everybody to continue to propagate out into the world, because it really is. At the end of the day, we are just trying to make every next day better than the last.
It's
And
better than Lex Primus metaphor.
you know what? That's barcodes are very, very important because,
You're very politic.
well, I'm just saying, you gotta, if you sell merchandise, you gotta have a SKU. If you know what I'm saying, if you want to return something to the store after you bought it, you gotta make sure you have the tag. Barcodes are important, but also when we use metaphor and we integrate it into the way that we think and we integrate it into the structure of our lives, we are coding our lives with bars because we're
100%.
rappers. So, that's what we do. But also, a lot of
Well,
people use metaphor and don't know it. So there are bars being spit, codes being dropped, and we don't even know that it's always happening. So, barcodes are very important. That's why I said that. So, yeah. Shout
good
out
job.
to shout out shout out to Lux Primus.
Good job. Good work.
Thank you, thank you. That was a freestyle, by the way. I just want everybody. Yeah, okay. So, what element of songwriting, since we're gonna switch from freestyle to songwriting, what element of songwriting do you feel is most often freestyled? So, is it melodies? Is it lyrics? We talk about top line. What do you think?
I mean, it just depends artist by artist. Different people write different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it just depends on that individual artist.
Yeah.
I think that I kind of like I kind of like when people go into the booth and like freestyle melodies and then come back and refine it and tighten it up and then
Mm.
add lyrics in that way. I think that create some songs that are melodically very strong.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you start with and whatever you emphasize tends to be what's the strongest.
Mm-hmm.
So um, there have been times when I really liked to start with a concept, and then the concept is the strongest thing.
Right.
It's is whatever you start with is the actual freestyle part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you start with is what's free, and then you come
From
back.
scratch, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, that's kind of a barcode in and of itself, because uh, from scratch is really how hip hop started. Kinda, it's got like this whole. Okay, maybe I'm being a nerd. Okay, so moving on to the next question: does abstract thought, abstract imagination, benefit the mind tasked with piercing together sorry, I can't say it, metaphorical significance in life? Can it possibly be a hindrance?
Nah, it helps.
Okay, because we think about abstract thought. No,
Good
I'm gonna
answer.
dig a little deeper. I'm gonna dig a little deeper. So we think about painting, for instance, right? Very visual, very visceral, very multitudinous in the way that you can kind of interpret things, right? And especially abstract painting. Um, it's really hard to put words to it necessarily without potentially missing something. So, um, would you say that abstract thought kind of fills in the gaps of the other structured kind of aspect of freestyling, where we know that there's a structure? We use rhythm, we use rhyme, we use placement, we use kind of intent, and all these things that we compile together and just spit out kind of ad nauseum. Does abstract thought, um, like, how does it shape something like a freestyle, or something like being able to put metaphors together in your head as you see something happening in real time?
Well, abstract thought allows us to connect things that we can't connect through linear thought.
Mm-hmm.
And that's critically important in creativity.
Yeah.
You've heard Louis speak previously that that's what creativity is, putting things that haven't been put together before together.
Mm.
So that's pretty much the definition of abstract thought,
Yeah.
connecting things that are previously unconnected.
Right. How can I take a tank and a shark and put them together somehow, and to make something that's significant about right now?
Shark Tank.
Shark Tank. There it is. Boom. So, and people need to get their businesses up and running. Everybody who's at home and doesn't really have anything to do right now, or is trying to figure out what they need to. Maybe we'll get into that in a minute. Okay. So,
Okay.
for Black people in the United States,
Yes.
Independence Day is tomorrow. Perhaps. It may be starting to have a shift in significance, right? July the 4th. Is the juxtaposition of Juneteenth, which is the Black Independence Day of, descendants of enslaved people, right?
Is it?
Well, we can question that. But is the juxtaposition between Juneteenth and July 4th something that Black people need to make a firm decision on as a collective ASAP? Or is it valuable to find every opportunity to celebrate freedom, because freedom, or I should say the celebration thereof, is kind of uh, perhaps putting it out into the world, right? Manifesting it by celebrating it. So you're kind of already drawing it closer to you in terms of speaking things into existence and what have you. So I don't know. I mean, you sound like maybe Juneteenth isn't necessarily a day of independence per se, but what do you think?
I think a lot.
Okay.
To be IT. I mean, one, we're talking about holidays, holy days, right? So
Okay.
what's the function of that? Are they days that we make holy, and if so, what for?
Mm-hmm.
That needs to be looked at.
Okay.
What July 4th stands for,
Mm-hmm. Right.
the denotation and the connotation, what it stands for on paper and what it means
Hmm.
to individuals. Same thing is with Thanksgiving, what it stands for on paper.
Right.
But then, Thanksgiving comes, it's like, but I want that plate. Like, I don't want to kill Indians, but I want that plate though.
Hmm.
Um,
Facts.
4th of July comes, you're like, I mean, you know, I'm not here for Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, but I like fireworks, or I like
Blowing stuff up.
barbecues, or um, Juneteenth.
Mhm.
I like it for what it is, which is the day slaves in the furthest reaching part of Texas, I believe, were alerted that they were free. I would prefer
Mhm.
the holiday if Black people had actually achieved freedom,
Right. Actual.
actual freedom.
Yeah.
Where it's nominal.
Mm-hmm.
The freedom is nominal at that point.
By name
And
only. Yep.
when we are still, Black maternal death rates are very high, Black incarceration rates are very high, Black home ownership not high, Black health insurance rates not high, Black wages not high. The rates that Black people are murdered by police high.
Ah.
It speaks to ongoing oppression
Mm-hmm.
across many, many markers.
Right.
And it's
Many.
hard for me to square that with freedom. It's hard for me to call that free.
Mm-hmm.
More free. By magnitudes, we are more and more free. But I don't want to celebrate freedom lest we forget we still have a journey ahead. We still have
Long way to go.
miles to cover. So I like to, I don't get payday loans. When I get my check, I cash it. So when we're free, I'll celebrate it.
Got it. Okay. Um. So to think more about freedom and the style of living that we could say is free, which is freestyle, right? One could say that freestyle is something that comes from the heart, unique to the individual to a degree. With all the online learning and training tools available to our viewers out there, is now perhaps the best time in a generation to freestyle one's heart into a new, maybe more relevant to the times career path.
Yes, I already said
Yeah, you did.
that.
But I wanted to speak on it a little bit more because we talked about, you know, thinking about, we've talked about voting. We've
Hmm.
talked about, people being able to kind of express themselves via the work that they do. Um, you know, have you come across any notable or significant kind of nuanced things that come out of the digital space from people kind of having these stay-at-home orders where there's a new hot thing that's happening? Because like obviously we like to be on the what's the new, the bleeding edge, what's the hip-hopness of this, right? So what's the
We've all
hip-hopness?
seen the verses
Oh
thing.
yeah, the verses for sure. Yeah.
We've all seen the verses.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's something that's going to expand, or do you feel like that's like it?
No,
Nah, it's just it's a heavy lift that one strong back can maybe achieve, and then we'll
no,
maybe
I almost feel like verses has run its course now. I'm sure their
really.
numbers aren't as high as they were.
Hmm.
I think the numbers, and I could be very wrong, but
Hmm.
my gut feeling is that the numbers were highest for Erica and Jill OT.
Yeah.
Um, because verses was super exciting when they were really battling. They were being nice, but they were really battling. Like Jonte and Neo, they were like, "Aye, you got, but who's up right now? Who's winning?" As soon as they stopped keeping score,
Hmm.
they weren't as exciting.
Mm.
They just weren't.
Interesting. The
But
competition aspect of it.
yeah,
Okay.
but I mean, I like the mutual appreciation of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
It's
you
still
know,
more boring.
so and this is kind of where that this is kind of where that question comes in then, where people have an opportunity to kind of expand upon maybe their career path or their skill set or what have you. Maybe we need more technological platforms built for ourselves that would allow us to be
With
able to,
ourselves.
huh?
Who is ourselves?
Well, this generation, black people, hip hop culture, all the
All
all the different ways that we can be sliced up. If there are groups of people who are underrepresented, having a technological platform from a small select number of experts in that field,
Niche platforms.
you'd be surprised how much of an explosion a niche could become once
Would
it
I?
gets. Nah, you wouldn't. I'm speaking to the royal we, right? So, all right, moving on to the next question, and we got a couple more here, and then we're gonna wrap it up. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the people in the comments. We got a lot of our ITs in the comments today with the crazy emojis and all that kind of stuff, and the good words as well.
I can't see any of their. Can I look at the chat?
The chat sometimes comes up in the so we have it on YouTube live right now. So you'll be able to see the actual comments come up in the actual video stream at a later time. I set it up so that it could be, you can see who says what when.
Hi, ITs.
Yeah.
Hi, ITs. I appreciate y'all.
Right. And this is a great conversation that we're having. Everybody in the chat loves it, and this will definitely live on in perpetuity for lovers of conversations like this. So what comes to mind regarding the metaphor? Because we're gonna do another metaphor now. Life is an instrument from your perspective, because you being an instrumental artist, you play the piano, play instruments. So
okay, so if life is an instrument, what do we do with instruments? We play instruments. We practice our instrument, like we practice life.
Yeah.
Or life is a practice.
These are the entailments, people. That's what we call entailments.
I think as that's a place where it becomes like a little less rounded, because an instrument is something you practice.
Perhaps an instrument can be something that gets used. Every instrument, like a person can be used as an instrument. That's been a metaphor that I've seen before.
But here's the thing about using a person as an instrument.
Right.
It's like, oh, you played me like
fiddle.
Yeah. Right. Which is great, because it's like, oh, I got played. Like there's a bunch of ways you can spin that.
Right.
But life is an instrument. One of the things that you do is you can use your life. Like, oh, I'm going to use it up. How do we use it? We use it to amplify a message. Do we use it to write and play our song? How do we develop skill at it?
Right.
We play at it. So we're playing at life because we're playing our instrument. I don't know. That one's a little wonky. You can make it fit, but it's not as natural a fit, because there's things that we can do with instruments that we can't do with life. We can't set life down.
And come back to it later, right?
Right. Life is not a choice. Life is something that it starts and then it keeps going until it's done. It has a finite nature to it that an instrument doesn't have.
Okay. You
can pick an instrument up, put it down, come back to it later, break it, put it back together.
Add a piece to it.
Yeah, why not?
Okay. That's an interesting one, because that's what we might call a thin branch, yeah?
Yeah. You're out on the skinny branches with that one.
Okay.
But I like it, because we build metaphors and then we test them in these ways. We're like, what are the ways that it works and what are the ways that it doesn't?
Right.
I love to take, and it's a great way to write a song, is to like start with a metaphor and build it out.
Just keep going deeper and deeper and more extensive and more extensive. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can find the place. Instead of, I like so much better to do that with intentionality than to have mixed metaphors, or you have metaphors that aren't cohesive in the same. So you'll be like, life is a journey and you need a good foundation. What? You just use the building metaphor.
Right.
It's like, you didn't even have to do that. You just could have been more intentional, thought about it for a second.
Right. Okay. Um, to kind of play on the metaphor of the skinny branch, a lot of the skinny branches are where the fruit is bared. So
No,
no, you don't bear fruit on skinny
no,
branches.
no,
The
no.
skinny
I
branches are
mean,
the weak ones. Then, yeah.
they're too. If we go to the actual physicality of a skinny branch,
Mhm.
not strong enough to hold like an apple or an
True.
orange.
True.
It has to be,
Yeah.
it has to mature. So
Right.
it's like when we have those skinny branches, we build them up and we allow them to mature and get thick. We do this kind of work where
This
we
kind of
think
work.
about them and we mature them and we say, oh, it has to grow this way. It can't grow that way. And
Mhm.
then when it has a little more, it's a little more substantive, then it can bear fruit.
Right. Very true. Facts. This is why these are bars. People listen to these bars. Um. So, final question I have for you. Well, maybe the final. We'll see. I know it's starting to get over an hour at this point, so we'll start to wrap it up so I can save you some of your evening and maybe you can get into your weekend festivities of celebration, perhaps. Do you agree with the idea that women play a prominent role when it comes to leading societal change, or the idea that Black women are always at the forefront of the movements for Black lives? We kind of spoke on this kind of at the top, but I want to see if you have any kind of like closing statements as it pertains to how important the role of women is.
Cherchez la femme, look for the woman. It's super important.
Okay,
Men don't carry babies.
right. Yeah, the next
They're,
generation is going to come from all women. The next
I
generation.
don't think it's going to come from all, but I do see
Well, I'm saying,
over
I'm
and
saying, I'm saying, genealogically speaking, the next generation literally is being birthed.
literally,
Yeah,
literally.
yeah.
I do see at the forefront of movements a lot of times, and this is just an observation,
Hmm.
there will be a charismatic leader who's a speaker, who's out front, who's a man.
Hmm.
And then you'll see over time when it's not as flashy, doing work that is not as glamorous, that keeps the movement going, is a woman. And I see that over and over.
Hmm.
Um, and it's not always like that. I'm not saying that we don't have some extremely charismatic and I mean, just inspiring to listen to speakers and leaders of the movements that are women, because we can name them off. I'm really heartened to start seeing, bell hooks and Audre Lorde and Angela Davis getting more love and getting more press. Elaine Powers.
Yeah, yeah. Deep Scribe IT says Marsha P. Johnson is his only comment
Hey,
on this
hey,
subject.
hey, I deep scrap IT. Um, but yeah, a lot of times there are women holding these movements
Hmm.
together,
Hmm.
and it's all about balance. It's all about balance. It's all about bringing our own unique gifts to the table. But there was a time when I first started learning about the Black Power movement. All the names: Fred Hampton, Huey Newton, Stokely Carmichael. We weren't hearing about the women,
Right.
but women were so important to that movement
Integral. Yeah.
and continued to keep it alive when unfortunately a number of those people had passed away
Hmm.
or moved on.
Hmm.
So, I see the patterns. I see the pattern surely.
Definitely. So that is the end of my kind of battery of questions. But um, as we kind of wrap this up, is there anything that you want to say to the people out there regarding the metaphor of life as a freestyle, or perhaps is there anything that you want to plug, anything that you've been doing lately that you want to kind of get people aware of so that they can kind of check it out and maybe amplify that for you and with you?
in terms of life as a freestyle,
Mhm.
the more you take in, the more options you have to put out. All that to say, you can't freestyle about something you don't know about, you haven't experienced, you haven't noticed.
Mhm.
So awareness is so important. And to the extent that you're able to increase your awareness, you've increased your options about where to go with your freestyle. So that's my shameless plug for mindfulness,
Mhm.
self awareness, meditation, read more, read more books. Um, get off Twitter once in a while, try some real critical thought. The
Mhm.
complex issues of our day can either be solved in a statement like, love is the answer, or through complex critical thought. There's no like, there's no middle ground. There's
Yeah,
no like, oh, cancel culture, hashtag this. Easy's
that's
not an
not gonna
option
do it.
anymore, not for real change.
Yeah,
So for the real change that I'm looking for, I have to look in the mirror, and I think we all do.
definitely. And with that, we want to thank Nikki Jean, IT, for coming in and blessing us with. I think that might have been 16 bars, maybe 18. Let me see. Yeah, we had a number of bars.
Well, we only allow 16.
Okay, well we'll cut the last part out. No, I was playing.
Deep and profound love to all of you guys. I really have so much love for each of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. This is the Freestyle Friday edition of the Life is a Freestyle project. And I'm Stu Because, I've been your host. And we'll see you next time on the Freestyle Fridays. Thank you and peace out.